Greetings. Brother Mark signing on, continuing the course on Christian antiquity, fathers of the church, the patristic period. Sorry about doing this in 3 parts, but ran out of time last night. Just had to get to the confirmation. And Pope Anicetus, whom we're covering, if this were just a history course, it wouldn't just take a few minutes because there's so little known about him. But we also have to do theology. So that's it just so happens that in his life we had the writings of Justin and the martyrdom of Justin and Polycarp. So that's why it took more time. But the one relief is that seminarians, one day you will appreciate this. The amplitude of anxiety now has been reduced because confirmation is over for this year. So I know I shouldn't worry. Jesus told us there's no point in worrying, but I don't know how to turn it off. So I worry about things. And worry. So it's a relief when it's over. Okay, so we will, this one will be brief, and then we'll finish Pope Anicetus. So we left off, we covered St. Justin Martyr's first apology addressed to the Emperor Antoninus Pius. The following year, in 156 AD, Justin wrote his second apology. Much shorter. This one consists of only 15 chapters, addressed to the Senate of Rome. In it, he demanded the same thing he did in the previous one that he addressed to the Emperor Antoninus. He demanded a halt to the unjust persecution of Christianity and insisted that if the Senate was indeed faithful to the ideals of the ancient republic, that it would publish his apology so that the entire world could see what Christianity really was, how it was being unjustly treated. Now it's kind of endearing, that Justin, despite his great intellect, he was kind of naive about some things. The Senate, of course, in no way, shape, or form, or inclination had any fidelity to the ideals of the ancient republic by this point. I mean, it was as if they were going to... The occasion for his writing the second apology was another outrage suffered by Christians. Completely unjust. There was a pagan married couple in Rome who had fully indulged in their fantasy lives in the temples of the more depraved cults. And I will not describe that in detail, as this is a family-friendly channel. I'm sure no one needs me to explain what people who went to the temple of Aphrodite did in the temple. So over time, his wife, the wife of the couple, happened to, in a way that we don't know, but she happened to learn of Christianity. And then she realized what she was doing, with these pagan cults, how debasing it was, and she became disgusted with her behavior and with herself after coming to know Christ. And so she tried to get her husband to reform as well, which he was not in a frame of mind to do. So, to retaliate against those he felt were responsible for ruining his fun, the husband denounced his wife's teacher, a guy named Ptolemaeus, to the prefect of Rome, Urbicius, as a Christian. So he said the policy at this period, from Trajan and Hadrian Antoninus, was that anonymous accusations against people were not to be acted on, But if someone were willing to put their name to the complaint and make the accusation in court, then the legal process was activated. And so this guy put his name to the complaint. So Ptolemaeus was arrested and was asked, you've been accused of Christianity, which is treason. Are you a Christian? And he said yes. He admitted he was a Christian, and he did not avail himself of the opportunity to save himself by renouncing it. So he was executed for the crime of Christianity, as were 2 other Christians who were captured with him. For Justin, this embodied the demonic machinations which attack the truth with lies and injustice. By refusing to even attempt to learn the facts of Christianity, the Senate and the people of Rome were accomplices of Satan in the greatest crime in history. Justin implored the Senate to learn the truth about Christianity, and once that was done, he was certain they would make the right decision. They would publish his apology, and they would decriminalize Christianity once they knew the truth. And here again, we have this, it's adorable, his naivete, as if he thought that everyone cared about the truth as much as he did. And of course, that is not the case in this vale of tears. The second apology was a condensed form of the first, but he did add a few things. So I won't repeat the arguments we already covered last time. Just those that make this one distinct. Which brings us to chapter 1. Quote, Romans, the things which have recently happened in your city under Anicetus, and the things which are likewise being everywhere unreasonably done by governors, have compelled me to frame this composition for your sake, who are men of like passions and brethren, though you know it not, and though you be unwilling to acknowledge it on account of your glorying, in which you esteem dignities. For everywhere, whoever is corrected by father or neighbor or child or friend or brother or husband or wife for a fault, for being hard to move, for loving pleasure inordinately, for being hard to urge to what is right, and except those who have been persuaded that the unjust and intemperate shall be punished in eternal fire, but that the virtuous and those who live like Christ shall dwell with God in a state that is free from suffering. We mean those who have become Christian. And the demons who hate us, and who keep such men as these subject to themselves, and serving them in the capacity of judges, incite them, as rulers actuated by evil spirits, to put us to death. But that the cause of all that has taken place under Anicetus may become quite plain to you, I will relate what has been done. Chapter 2. A certain woman lived with an intemperate husband, she herself too, having formerly been intemperate. But when she came to the knowledge of the teachings of Christ, she became sober-minded, and endeavored to persuade her husband likewise to be temperate, citing the teachings of Christ, and assuring him that there shall be punishment in eternal fire inflicted upon those who do not live temperately and conformably to right reason. See, that's the Stoic influencer. But he, continuing in the same excesses, alienated his wife from him by his actions. For she, considering it wicked to live any longer as a wife with a husband who sought in every way means of indulging in pleasure contrary to the law of nature, and in violation of what is right, wished to be divorced from him. And when she was persuaded by her friends, who advised her still to continue with him, in the idea that some time or other, her husband might give hope of amendment. She did violence to her own feelings and remained with him. But when her husband had gone into Alexandria and was reported to be conducting himself worse than ever, she, that she might not, by continuing in matrimonial connection with him, and by sharing his table and his bed, become a partaker also in his wickedness and impieties, gave him what you call a bill of divorce, and was separated from him. But this noble husband of hers, while he ought to have been rejoicing that those actions which formerly she unhesitatingly committed with the servants and the hirelings, when she delighted in drunkenness and every... Well, actually, I'm gonna skip this part. Because we are a family-friendly channel. All right, so let's skip this. Chapter 3. Anyway, you got that. I summarized it earlier, so you know what happened. Chapter 3. I too, therefore, expect to be plotted against and fixed to the stake by some of those I have named, or perhaps Crescens, that lover of bravado and boasting. For the man is not worthy of the name of philosopher, who publicly bears witness against us in matters which he does not understand, saying that the Christians are atheist and impious, and doing so to win favor with the deluded mob and to please them. All right, so skipping down, for I would have you know, right to the Senate, I would have you know that I proposed to him certain questions on this subject and interrogated him and found most convincingly that he, in truth, knows nothing. And to prove that I speak the truth, I am ready, if these disputations have not been reported to you, to conduct them again in your presence. You know, he's really convinced that he's willing to go, turn himself in, basically, to acknowledge and conduct a debate in front of the Senate over Christianity. And he was convinced that if they heard the truth, that they would, first, that they cared enough to hear the truth, and then if they did hear it, that they would have the humility to embrace it and admit that Rome had been perpetrating these horrific injustices against Christians, you know, without any justification. So again, that's his naivety. All right, chapter 5, he elaborates on what he already covered, that he believes the pagan deities do exist, but they're not deities, they're demons. And in chapter 5 of the second apology, he elaborates on what the demons were, that they were fallen angels, you know, that they had free will, you know, and that they chose. All right, I'll repeat all that. And it goes on and on. All right, so yeah, a lot of these, the rest of these. Chapter 13, this is something, you seminarians, you may cover this in your Christology class, or at least some version of this. So chapter 13 of the second apology, quote, for I myself, when I discovered the wicked disguise which the evil spirits had thrown around the divine doctrines of the Christians, to turn aside others from joining them, laughed both at those who framed these falsehoods and at the disguise itself, and at popular opinion. And I confess that I both boast and with all my strength strive to be a Christian, not because the teachings of Plato are different from those of Christ, but because they are not in all respects similar, as neither are those of the others, the Stoics, the poets, the historians. For each man spoke well in proportion to the share he had of the spermatic word, seeing what was related to it. Okay, so seminarians, that's the term. The spermatic word, I know that doesn't sound right in English, so just think of the etymological origins. It's a seed. So the word is the logos. So what I'm sure your Christology professors will elaborate on is he's developed, as we introduced the apologist, so one of the things they had to do or as an effect of what they had to do to explain Christianity, is that they created the lineaments of Christology and Trinitarian theology out of necessity of having to explain our beliefs to a pagan world. So this idea of the logos, you know what that is. That's the word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. So that word is a translation, an English translation of the Greek logos, from which also comes logic, order. And so we get that the governing order of the universe goes all the way to the Trinitarian deity, which created the universe. And then, as a result of that origin, the seeds of the word, this is that spermatic word, the spermatic logos, the seeds are in creation. Now, again, you'll cover that. Now, this can be misunderstood. And misunderstanding this, there are a few, at least 3 different misunderstandings of that could lead to different heresies. But a correct Orthodox understanding of it is still part of church teaching. But you always remember, Catholic theology, we always go from the top down. So we start with the divinity and reason down to us. So one of the ways this gets wrong is those who invert the theology, and they start with anthropology. They start their theological reasoning by reflecting on us, and then try to extrapolate from that to understand truths about the divinity. But that's not the Catholic way. The Catholic way is you start from the top down. If you do that, then this term can be understood. Is that because it's all in reference to the Trinitarian, the triune God as creator, which goes back to the book of Genesis. Let us, the plural, let us make man in our own image and likeness. So it's that Trinitarian deity. So that there is that, and which is also, we know that the dualists are wrong, because the earth, the material universe was, including us, were created by the divinity, so that we cannot be intrinsically evil. The creation can be misused. You know. No. Be gone. Anyway, so if you're Christian, this is where it comes from. The Second Apology, chapter 13. All right, and so to continue, so after that, for each man spoke well in proportion to the share he had of the spermatic word, seeing what was related to it. So that because that the logos, the creation by the deity, the divinity, is the basis for order, that the natural law exists because because it was made that way. Then there are those, he's talking about Plato and previous Stoics, previous philosophers, pre-Christian philosophers, who nevertheless did articulate some things that were true, and that's because they had perceived parts of the natural law of which they were created. Okay, so continuing the quote. But they who contradict themselves on the more important points appear not to have possessed the heavenly wisdom and the knowledge which cannot be spoken against. Whatever things were rightly said among all men are the property of us Christians. For next to God, we worship and love the Word, Logos, who is from the unbegotten and ineffable God, since also he became man for our sakes, that becoming a partaker of our sufferings, he might also bring us healing. So again, the Christology, the God and man, true God and true man. And so again, the dualists are wrong. They either reject the humanity or the divinity. So Justin's trying to say, okay, so the unbegotten, ineffable God, the Word was God, but he also became man for our sake. That's one of the mysteries of our faith. And even though it may not seem it, if you look at it, this actually verifies the truth. If we were to make up a religion, we would not make up something like this. We'd make up something that's more believable, more understandable. So we teach this because this is what was revealed. Back to the quote. For all the writers were able to see realities darkly through the sowing of the implanted word that was in them. For the seed and imitation impacted according to capacity is one thing, and quite another is the thing itself, of which there is participation and imitation according to the grace which is from him, from God. All right. See, chapter 14. This is again. Chapter 14. And we therefore pray you to publish this little book, appending what you think right, that our opinions may be known to others, and that these persons may have a fair chance of being freed from erroneous notions and ignorance of good, who by their own fault have become subject to punishment, that so these things may be published to men, because it is in the nature of man to know good and evil, and because they're condemning us. Well, I should say that that's another aspect of the natural law, the good and evil. Now, we can make the wrong choice, but we do have the capacity to know good and evil. And by their condemning us, whom they do not understand, for actions which they say are wicked, and by delighting in the gods who did such things, and even now require similar actions from men, and by inflicting on us death or bonds or some such punishment, as if we were guilty of these things, they condemn themselves, so that there is no need of other judges. And chapter 15 is the end. And I despise the wicked and deceitful doctrine of Simon of my own nation, and Simon Magus, who was a Samaritan. And of course, Justin Martyr was also born in Samaria, and Simon Magus was the inventor of Gnosticism. But he covered all that also in the first apology, so I won't repeat that. And chapter 15 is the end of the second apology. Okay, 156 AD, the emperor at the time, Antoninus Pius, turned 70. He was afflicted by a condition that was probably advanced arthritis, or rheumatoid arthritis, as he's described as needing braces to sit up. They had to improvise things to, as otherwise his torso would, so they had to, some kind of spinal, affliction where they had to make braces. They had to make braces to, essentially armor, to keep him upright. And he lived like that for years. So 4 years later, in 160, he designated his adoptive heirs. So just as Hadrian, to try to do two generations. So Hadrian had adopted him and another, but that other died before. So Antoninus also adopted two, to try to continue that succession. The heirs he adopted were Marcus, the guy who we know as Marcus Aurelius, and Lucius Verus. He adopted them and installed them as consuls. That's the two highest, the executive officers of that serve for 1 year terms. So they serve together. So again, legitimizing, kind of setting up the succession to avoid another civil war. So time passed. 2 days before his death, Antoninus was at his estate in what is now Tuscany. He ate some cheese at dinner. And, whether coincidence or not, but after eating this cheese, he had a violent gastric reaction, which caused the night of vomiting. And even when that stopped, he had fever, continued having fever into the next day and the following day. So 2 days after the cheese incident, he died, still in a state of fever, on March 7th, 161. Rome then came to be ruled by the most intellectually inclined of all the emperors, Marcus Aurelius, emperor number 16. Marcus had come to the attention of Hadrian 2 emperors ago, earlier in life, who saw that he had the finest tutors in the empire. Later, the Emperor Antoninus, introduced him to the business of running the world. Few rulers entered their office with better preparation for administration, but Antoninus provided Aurelius with zero military command experience. For his own part, Aurelius had a natural interest in philosophy. He wrote a classic text on the subject, the Meditations. which is Stoic in orientation, and he lived it. By all accounts, his taste remained restrained and simple, even when he was surrounded by wealth and opulence and power. It was during Aurelius's reign that the fall of the Roman Empire began. It wasn't his fault, and this is a judgment that is made in retrospect because of two things that happened in his reign, and the effects of which continued, to emanate in future reigns. First was the Parthian War from 161 to 165. Now we've met the Parthians before. That's Parthian, and then add the S for the plural. They were ethnically Farsi. Their base was in present-day Iran. The nucleus of their power was in northern Iran, but then they expanded. The borders oscillated back and forth. Now the Romans, as the Greeks before them, had fought wars against these people before, but this particular Parthian War, 161 to 165, can be isolated in retrospect as the beginning of the fall of the empire. Okay, for the following. This is what happened. The Parthians, of course, they kept an eye on the Romans, and there was trade. There was trade contact also. So it was easy to do, and they knew through the reign of Antoninus that despite his virtues, that he was not a soldier. In Rome, in all of his reign, it's a quarter of a century, Rome had not engaged in warfare, and that Rome was a military dictatorship, and so when it stopped engaging in warfare, people took notice, and then they knew from their spies about his successor Aurelius, who was a bookish intellectual. They thought that they perceived opportunity in this. The king of Parthia at the time was Vologases IV. He became king of Parthia in 161, and he invaded. He thought to precipitate things with Rome. He did not invade Rome. Well, it was too far away to invade Rome directly, but he did not invade one of the imperial provinces directly governed by Rome. Instead, he did a test, a probe invasion. He invaded one of Rome's client kingdoms, the client kingdom of Armenia. And he successfully overthrew the Roman client king and installed his own puppet as king of Armenia, a guy named Pacorus, who was an Arsacid like himself, who's a Persian, ethnically Farsi, but of the Arsacid dynasty. The next province over was Cappadocia. So the Roman governor of Cappadocia was now on the front line. And this was Marcus Severianus. He was the highest ranking officer in the region. Thinking that you remember that no satellites, there's no television or radio, so that they have to, so he heard there was an invasion, he heard something happen, but news would travel so slow and then it might not be accurate. It takes time to verify. So they have to kind of guess what's going on to interpret what happened. He thought the Parthians were just engaged in a raid. That they would invade, they would steal, do something and then go back. So he responded with only one legion, the 9th Legion, only to find, once it was too late, once he had marched with the legion, too far from his base, to find that he was facing the entire Parthian army, commanded by their best general, Chosroes. Severianus, when he realized the mistake, he attempted to maneuver a withdrawal, but the Parthians, they just had too many numbers, so they boxed him in at Elagaia, which then was in Armenia. Now it's located in northeastern Turkey. And there, past the headwaters of the Euphrates, Severianus said, well, okay, we can't get out, so we're just going to fight. And the legion fought to the last man. And Severianus committed suicide rather than endure capture. And then, so the new emperor, Aurelius, hears about this, and he's okay. He's emperor. He's got to do something about it. He personally was not inclined to warfare, but his deeply held Stoic ideals imbued him with an absolute sense of duty. So, if circumstances were such that the empire needed him to engage in warfare, then he would turn that intellect, that great intellect of his, fully to that project. 4 legions were redeployed. Legio 10, Legio 1, 2, and 5. And this started what turned out to be a 4-year war between Rome and Parthia, in which the Romans prevailed. And Aurelius, he taught them that a guy who's bookish is not necessarily incompetent. He not only defeated and drove back the Parthians out of Romania, but he chased them back into their own territory, and he burned their capital cities. I should say that the Persians had multiple capitals because their empire was so large, but the 2 closest were on the Tigris River. They're called 2 cities, Ctesiphon and Seleucia, but they were just on opposite sides of the river. So it was one like Budapest. The Danube goes through. But it's so the Ctesiphon and Seleucia were actually one, but they're often referred to as 2 cities because they're on the opposite sides of the river. But just for the sake of thoroughness, the Romans burned down both of them in 165 as punishment. So that's the Tigris River in present-day Iraq, but that's a part that the Persians had acquired. The ruins of these places are located 22 miles southeast of present-day Baghdad in Iraq. Ctesiphon is spelled Ctesiphon. That was on the eastern bank of the river. And Seleucia, Seleucia, was on the western side of the river. This victory was the first that Rome had gained against a foreign power outside the borders since Trajan's time. So we think, okay, Rome's back. But it had a devastating sequel, a history-changing sequel, when the victorious legions brought back from the east a lethal plague. In 2 years, 1/3 of the population of the Roman Empire died of this plague. So it's called the Antonine Plague, Antonine. It recurred in cycles. After the first 2-year outbreak, it kind of subsided, but it recurred in cycles from 165 to 180. It was also known as the Plague of Galen, because the ancient physician Galen is the one who described it. Where it's very important for medical history. It's theorized to have been either smallpox or measles, because it did have the skin eruptions, and it was first recorded as breaking out at the siege of Seleucia on the Tigris in 165. And so the troops brought it back. They brought it back to the empire. It's estimated that at its peak it was killing 2,000 a day in the empire. And again, this is an estimate, but it's thought that by the time it was all done, it killed 10 million people in the empire. This plague is taken by some historians as the beginning of the fall of the Roman Empire. Coinciding as it does, and I agree, but not just because of that, but also because it coincided with the Parthian invasion. And then the Parthians, it was certainly not the first time that people had made incursions on the borders. But in retrospect, it turned out to be continuous from this point on. After the Parthians' border incursion, then the Germans on the Rhine, the Germans in the Danube, the Celts in Britannia, that all the borders of the empire are going to constantly, from this point on, be attacked, probed. Sometimes the borders would be breached, And so the Rome was in a constant state of insecurity, and you constantly having to fight these things, and we'll see the effects over time. So I think those two things together, the Antonine Plague, and with the beginning of the constant border wars, those together, that makes it fair to see this as the beginning of the fall of the empire. Now, the empire still had a great deal of resilience, so it took a while. It took a long time. I mean, it took a while to fall, but we can see it begins here. All right. It was in the midst of the early stages of this plague that a panicked Roman population was distracted, by the authorities with the ludi, public games, free entertainment, which included free food, free booze, and so of course they have to have people to torture to death for this entertainment, and Christians were at hand. Christian torture and murder form part of the entertainment. Justin Martyr and Pope Anicetus both fell in this. They were both captured. An account of the martyrdom of Justin has survived along with others that were murdered with him: Caratine, Carates, Paeon, Liberianus, and others. So let's see, the martyrdom of Justin from chapter 1. In the time of the lawless disciples of idolatry, wicked decrees were passed against the godly Christians in town and country to force them to offer libations to vain idols. And accordingly the holy men, having been apprehended, were brought before the prefect of Rome, Rusticus by name. And when they had been brought before his judgment seat, said to Justin, "Obey the gods at once." Justin said, "To obey the commandments of our Savior, Jesus Christ, is worthy neither of blame nor condemnation." Rusticus the prefect said, "What is your belief?" Justin said, "That according to which we worship the God of the Christians, whom we reckon to be one from the beginning, the maker and fashioner of the whole creation, visible and invisible, and the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who had also been preached beforehand by the prophets, as about to be present with the race of men, the herald of salvation, and teacher of good disciples." And it goes on like that. Then Rusticus, where do you assemble? And anyway, so it's in chapter 2. Justin said, "Yes, I'm a Christian." Then we get the names. Chapter 3, we get the names of these other people. And Rusticus does the same thing. They counter the martyrdom and say, "Okay, are you a Christian?" Remember, they could save themselves. They, say, "Oh, no, yeah, I'm not a Christian." Yeah, where's the what idol do you want me to sacrifice to? Remember, the Gnostics, the dualists, could do that. Then he goes through that. Chapter 4, he offers them the chance. He threatens them with death. Said, you're gonna die. If you don't, but you have a chance. Rusticus the prefect said, this is chapter 4, "Let us then now come to the matter in hand, and which presses. Having come together, offer sacrifice with one accord to the gods." Justin said, "No right-thinking person falls away from piety to impiety." Again, it's very naive, because of course, not everyone's right-thinking. But what you will, do what you will, for we are Christians and do not sacrifice to idols. Chapter 5, the sentence pronounced, which of course was execution. So they were subjected to the public, they were stripped and subjected to the public flogging and agonizing. The bodies are mangled by the Roman whips, and then they were finished off with beheading. Pope Anicetus himself died on April 20th, 166, during the same persecution. The LP, the Liber Pontificalis, records that he held 5 ordinations. And again, this is the way, it phrases it, said in the month of December, but it doesn't say, was it just one December, or was it several Decembers in a row? But it does tell us he ordained 19 priests, 4 deacons, and 9 bishops. So continuing the apostolic succession. And was martyred on April 20th and buried in the catacombs of St. Callistus. And that the apostolic see was sede vacante, vacancy, for 17 days. He was followed as Pope number 12 by Saint Soter, Soter. So we'll pick up with that, with Saint Soter next time. For the moment, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.